Would you like to see my garden, sweetie? The day my LA dream became a nightmare. The summer of '85 was supposed to be the beginning of our grand adventure. My father, a Navy veteran with years of service, had just been assigned a new role that moved us all out to Los Angeles. I was 6 years old, wide-eyed, and full of wonder. Los Angeles was the city of dreams, a place I'd only ever heard about in stories or seen in the few movies my parents let me watch. I imagined it as a bustling paradise where streets were lined with palm trees, where famous people wandered the sidewalks, and where every day felt like sunshine and magic. Moving from our small town to this vast city felt surreal, almost like a fairy tale. I imagined the Hollywood sign gleaming above the city, celebrities strolling down every street corner, and the beaches brimming with people basking in the California sun. I could barely contain my excitement, envisioning a world so glamorous and different from my old life. As our family packed up everything we owned and drove across state lines, I couldn't stop myself from daydreaming about LA. It was Hollywood, it was glamour, it was the city where anything was possible. But while I was ready for new adventures, nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare waiting for me there. We'd been in Los Angeles for about 3 months when it happened. Our new house was modest, nestled in a Navy family neighborhood that looked almost too ordinary, too uniform, with its identical houses and neat lawns, all blending into each other. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, where neighbors waved from across the street but rarely stopped to talk. The front yard was my safe space, a place where I'd sit for hours, tearing petals off flowers and letting my imagination run wild. I imagined those flowers as part of some enchanted garden, and in my mind, I was the queen of this tiny kingdom, surrounded by colors and the faint scent of plumeria. I loved how quiet the street was, how I could hear every bird chirping, every rustle of leaves in the breeze. My mom was inside watching Chopped, her favorite cooking show, and my sister was off playing with friends down the street. My dad was on assignment, halfway across the Pacific, which meant it was just us girls at home. I felt safe, invincible even. The neighborhood was so calm, and nothing bad could happen in a place so ordinary. Or so I thought. That day, the sun was relentless, casting sharp shadows that made everything seem harsher, almost surreal. The street was empty, not a single person or car moved along the quiet road. The quiet felt strange, like a pause in the middle of a song, an absence that should have been filled with the sounds of neighbors and passing cars. But the stillness was almost hypnotic, lulling me into a sense of security. I was sitting cross-legged on the grass, plucking petals from the plumeria flowers one by one, entranced by the simple beauty of each one. In my head, I imagined that these flowers held some sort of magic, that they were tokens from a fairy world, and if I arranged them just right, they would unlock a secret portal. I didn't notice the van pull up at first. It crept silently, barely making a sound as it parked by the mailbox, blending into the empty street. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. The van's windows were so darkly tinted that I couldn't see a thing inside. It sat there, idling, like it was waiting for something or someone. I tried to shake off the strange feeling growing in my stomach. It's just a van, I told myself, probably someone stopping to check their mail. But it stayed there, parked, the engine humming softly in the oppressive silence. I turned back to my flowers, trying to ignore it, but I couldn't help glancing up every few seconds. Something about that van was wrong. It was as if it were watching me, waiting. And then the door opened. The creak of the van door was unnaturally loud, slicing through the silence and sending a shiver down my spine. Out stepped a woman. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with a slender frame and long, wild hair that seemed to fall around her shoulders in messy waves. She wore a red camisole that clung to her shoulders and faded jeans that looked slightly too big for her. And, strangest of all, she was barefoot. Her bare feet pressed down onto the hot asphalt, and she didn't flinch. I remember thinking, doesn't that hurt? The ground was burning hot under the midday sun, and even the grass felt like it was radiating heat. But she moved as if she didn't feel a thing, as if she were gliding across the surface. Her gaze locked onto me as she walked forward, step by silent step, her eyes holding a strange intensity that made my skin crawl. She kept coming closer, her face stretched into a smile that was too wide, too practiced. It was a grin that didn't reach her eyes, a mask that seemed to be hiding something else. Her teeth were so white they almost glowed, catching the sunlight in a way that made them seem almost sharp. My heart pounded in my chest, an instinctual fear rising up in me, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between the urge to run and the strange, terrifying fascination that kept me frozen. As she stopped just a foot or two away, she crouched down to my level, her face mere inches from mine. Up close, I could smell her perfume, a sickly sweet scent that made me feel nauseous, like flowers left to rot in a closed-up room. Her eyes were glassy, vacant, as if she weren't really seeing me, but something beyond me. "Oh, you like flowers," she said, her voice soft and syrupy, like she was talking to a baby. The words slithered out, wrapping around me, and I felt an icy shiver run down my spine. Her tone was almost too sweet, an exaggerated kindness that felt rehearsed, calculated. I could feel the hidden weight behind her words, like she was trying to draw me in, to lull me into a false sense of security. She reached out a hand, fingers lingering near my arm, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. My heart raced, and every instinct screamed at me to get up and run. But I stayed rooted to the spot, caught in her gaze, unable to break the strange, twisted spell she'd cast. Then she said it, the words that would haunt me for years. "Would you like to come see my garden, sweetie?" For a moment, the words didn't register. It was such a simple question, one that should have been innocent, but the way she said it twisted the meaning, made it feel sinister. Her voice dripped with something dark, an undertone that felt wrong, like poison wrapped in sugar. I opened my mouth to answer, almost out of reflex, but a tiny voice in my head screamed, "No." I shook my head and managed to whisper, "No, thank you." Her smile faltered, her expression shifting so quickly that it sent a jolt of fear through me. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, her face twisted into something cold, something angry. Then, just as quickly, the mask slipped back into place, and her face softened. But the momentary flash of fury was burned into my memory, a glimpse of the darkness hiding beneath her carefully crafted facade. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Would you like to repeat that?" she asked, her tone icy and mocking, as if she were daring me to say no again. My stomach knotted, fear prickling along my skin, but I managed to gather the tiny shred of courage I had left. "No, thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. Her eyes darkened, and before I could react, her hand shot out, clamping down around my wrist with an iron grip. Her fingers dug into my skin, cold and unyielding, and she yanked me toward her, her face mere inches from mine. "I know you'll love it there," she murmured, her voice still dripping with false sweetness as she pulled me closer. My mind went blank with terror, and I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Strangled by the fear that had taken hold of me. The world around me seemed to blur, leaving only her and the dark, looming van. I could feel her nails digging into my wrist, leaving marks that would ache long after this moment. I tried to pull away, but her grip was unbreakable, her fingers like steel bands around my arm. She was dragging me closer to the van, her steps silent on the grass, her bare feet moving with an eerie grace. It was as if she were floating, gliding across the ground, her movements too smooth, too practiced. In that moment of sheer terror, something deep within me remembered the self-defense moves my dad had taught me. He'd always said, "Twist and pull, honey, twist and pull." With every ounce of strength I could muster, I twisted my wrist sharply, yanking it toward me with all my might. Miraculously, her grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I stumbled back, adrenaline surging through my veins, and without a second thought, I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could carry me. The world around me was a blur, the only clear image in my mind the front door of my house, just a few feet away. My lungs burned, and my heart pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. I ran, not daring to look back, afraid of what I might see if I did. All I could think was that I had to reach the front door, that if I could just get inside, I'd be safe. But I didn't make it. Just as I was about to reach the door, I felt her hand grab a fistful of my hair, yanking me backward with a force that nearly sent me sprawling. Pain exploded in my scalp, sharp and searing, and I cried out, but my voice was thin and weak, choked by the terror lodged in my throat. Her grip was unrelenting, her fingers twisting in my hair as she dragged me backward. I stumbled, struggling to keep my balance, but the pain made my legs feel weak. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck, hot and ragged, and I could hear her muttering to herself, words that were half whispers, almost incoherent. It sounded like some twisted, dark mantra, words that made no sense but filled me with a primal fear. Desperation clawed at me, and I tried to scream, but it was like my throat had closed up, trapping the sound inside. All I could manage were choked gasps, the sound of my own panicked breathing filling my ears. I twisted and thrashed, pulling against her grip, but she was relentless, her fingers digging into my skin, holding me captive. My tears blurred my vision, turning the world around me into a distorted, nightmarish haze. My legs scraped against the rough ground, and I could feel the sting of scratches forming, but the pain was nothing compared to the sheer terror that consumed me. And then, through the blur, I saw her, my mom's face in the window, her eyes wide with horror, her mouth open in a silent scream. I pounded on the glass, praying she'd see me, praying she'd come. The world seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity as I watched her face shift from shock to fury. Within moments, she burst out of the front door, her face contorted with a mix of fear and rage that I'd never seen before. She didn't look like my mom in that moment. She looked like a warrior, a force of nature ready to protect her child at all costs. Her scream shattered the silence, a raw, primal sound that sent chills down my spine. Even I was startled by the ferocity in her voice. The woman holding me froze, her grip loosening just enough for me to pull free. I stumbled forward, nearly falling, but I managed to catch myself, scrambling toward my mom with every ounce of strength I had left. I could hear the woman's footsteps behind me, retreating, but I didn't look back. I only saw my mom's open arms, her face streaked with tears, her expression fierce and determined. She pulled me into her arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, but I didn't care. I buried my face in her shoulder, feeling the safety of her embrace, the warmth that chased away the cold terror lingering in my bones. I could feel her trembling as she whispered soothing words, her voice breaking as she promised that I was safe, that she wouldn't let anything happen to me. But I could still feel the woman's grip on my wrist, the ghost of her fingers digging into my skin, and I knew that the memory of this day would haunt me for years to come. The police arrived not long after, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over our quiet street. They asked me questions I barely understood in my shaken state. I told them what I could remember, but everything felt like a blur, like a nightmare I couldn't quite shake. They took my description of the woman, of the silver van with the tinted windows, but there wasn't much else I could tell them. The details slipped away, replaced by a fog of fear and confusion. I remember the officers looking at me with pity, their faces tense as they exchanged glances. I heard them muttering to each other, something about close calls and a lucky escape, but their words felt distant, like they were coming from the other side of a thick wall. The van was found hours later, abandoned on a side road several miles from our neighborhood. Inside, the police found duffel bags, ropes, duct tape, and other things I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. I remember hearing my mom talking to the police, her voice hushed but panicked, as she asked if they thought the woman had done this before, if she was out there somewhere looking for another child. The officers tried to reassure her, but I could see the worry in their eyes, the way they exchanged tense looks as they discussed the case. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her too wide smile, her vacant, glassy eyes staring at me as she whispered those haunting words, "Would you like to see my garden, sweetie?" The question echoed in my mind, twisting and warping until it was all I could hear. I lay in bed, my body tense and my heart racing, afraid that if I fell asleep, she'd somehow find me again. My mom stayed by my side, her hand gently stroking my hair, her soft whispers filling the silence, but even her presence couldn't chase away the fear. The memory of that day wrapped around me like a shadow, clinging to me, and I knew that it would be a long time before I felt safe again. In the days that followed, my parents took every possible precaution. My dad came home as soon as he could, and he hugged me so tightly I thought I'd break. They enrolled me in more self-defense classes, cutting my hair short so it would be harder for anyone to grab. They installed extra locks on the doors and made sure I was never alone, even in our own yard. My mom watched me like a hawk, her gaze constantly scanning our surroundings as if she expected the woman to appear out of nowhere. And every time a car slowed down near our house, I felt that familiar chill creep up my spine, the ghost of that day lurking just beneath the surface. For years, I was haunted by that memory. I couldn't go near the mailbox without feeling a spike of fear, and every time I saw a silver van, my heart would skip a beat. I'd watch people's faces, looking for that too wide smile, those empty eyes that had filled my nightmares. My parents did their best to help me, but the trauma had dug deep, leaving scars that wouldn't fade. I learned to hide my fear, to pretend that I was okay, but every night, when the lights went out and the house fell silent, I would lie in bed, waiting for the sound of a van's engine, for the creak of a door opening in the dark. I never saw the woman again. She vanished as quickly as she had appeared, leaving nothing behind but an abandoned van and a trail of questions that would never be answered. The police continued their investigation, but as time passed, the case went cold. She became a ghost story, a whispered warning, a memory that lingered like a shadow over our family. And while part of me hoped she'd been caught, that she was somewhere far away where she couldn't hurt anyone, another part of me knew she was still out there, waiting for her next target. To this day, I can still feel the weight of her grip on my wrist, the chill of her voice as she tried to lure me away with promises of a garden. And every time I think back to that summer, to the day my LA dream became a nightmare, I'm reminded of how close I came to losing everything. So to the woman who tried to take me, who thought she could lure a child with a smile and a soft voice, let's never meet again.